One of the most debated topics in the field of education is the controversy of whether the theory of evolution should be taught in public schools. This video will attempt to clarify the main points and main contributors to this issue. For some background information, rewind back to 1925, when Darwinism was on the rise. People in Tennessee were in an uproar after teachers began to implement the theory of evolution in their school's curriculum. Even though the theory had been basically proven as scientific fact, it contradicted the religious beliefs of the largely Christian population of the state. How?
In the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, sacred texts speak of the world being only about 10,000 years old and of people and animals being placed on the ark by God rather than evolving from one another. Darwinism renders both of these claims obsolete. The matter was eventually taken to court in the so-called Scopes Monkey trial of 1925. In it, the court ruled that evolution could not be taught in public schools because it degraded certain religion beliefs. But however entertaining the trial was, it never resolved the question of whether the First Amendment permitted states to ban teaching of a theory which contradicted religious beliefs.
It wasn't until 1968, during the Epperson versus Arkansas case, that the Supreme Court ruled such bans unconstitutional, as their main purpose was religious and therefore unable to be made into legislation. Still, many parents have reservations about sending their kids in to learn about evolution, even though it has now become a foundational concept of modern biology. Many public classrooms have taken to avoiding the subject by simply never mentioning evolution in the classroom. But whether this is the right thing to do remains to be seen.
I do believe it should be taught in schools. I feel that kids should be allowed to decide their own whether or not they believe it or not. I feel it's important just to put the knowledge in their heads so they can decide for themselves.
Support 100% of the idea of not teaching that theory in school, because of two reasons. Number one is because of religion. The three main religions in the United States of America are Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And these three religions believe in the same thing about mankind. Adam being the first human being, and Adam did not evolve from a monkey. With nearly 80% of Americans being one of this religion, the theory of evolution contradicts to the teaching of this religion. And as a Muslim myself, I object this theory 100%.
A survey was conducted at a Penn State branch campus where graduate students who happened to teach at public schools were asked if they believed that their religious beliefs were in conflict with the theory of evolution. 52% agreed, 22% disagreed, and 17% were uncertain. The second question asked for whether or not they believed that humans derived from earlier species. 32% agreed, 37% disagreed, and 32% were uncertain.
Confusion when it comes to talking about a theory in science. So in science, a theory is a comprehensive explanation of some aspect of nature that is supported by a vast body of evidence. What typically refers to an observation, a measurement, or some other form of evidence is like a fact. So we'll use a fact when we say, for example, in this experiment we found that the color of the liquid was blue at the end. That's the sort of thing we would call a fact. Whereas a theory, some other names of scientific theories are the theory of gravity, the theory of the tectonic plates, cell theory, which talks about the fact that we're all based upon the same source, are subject to continual refinement. But typically when something gets to the point where we call it a theory, it's so well established that no new evidence is likely to change sort of the core idea of it. So I would say that even within the context of the religious controversy, it's still valid science, and you would be hard-pressed to find anybody who has a biology, life science background and does that as a job that would say anything other than evolution is what we base huge amounts of our research on and is the core assumption for most of
So one thing it is not is it is not a scientific controversy. So the science on evolution is pretty well settled to the extent that there is agreement among biologists that evolution has occurred and continues to occur. The basic idea about evolution has been well established in the science. So the controversy is, I might have called it a social and political controversy.
School systems, it takes a long time for school systems to sort of change their curriculum, re-instruct teachers in how things work, all that sort of stuff. So typically what you find in a public school classroom is not, just because it takes a long time to sort of redo the curriculums. My mother is in education. Most schools only adopt new textbooks once every 6 or 8 years. It's a huge expenditure to do so. And so the first problem, I think, is just that all these things, anything that's new, is slow to accumulate into textbooks and into teacher education. The second problem is that we are living in a Judeo-Christian society, and there's a large push for the fact that in some people, the Bible is word for word literally true. And that contradicts the sort of concept in a literal fashion that evolution contradicts the first chapter of Genesis if you take it literally. And that, I think, has posed a pushback from some of the very strongly outspoken religious community. However, if you talk about, the Catholic Church, they accept the doctrine of evolution, and it's actually frequently taught in Catholic schools. The Pope has even recently said that it should be taught. And there's typically no problem with your mainstream Lutheran, Episcopals, Methodists. So it's generally, I think it's a small portion of very outspoken people.
I think the controversies can be taught, but not in a science classroom. Okay, because there is no scientific controversy. You know, one way of thinking about it is, why should we privilege the Christian religion story, the Christian creation story, over another one?
True.
You know, why not introduce the creation story from another religion? But in a science classroom, I actually don't think there is a controversy. I think that the science is pretty well established, that it's evolution. Now, does that mean they should never mention creationism? Not necessarily, because, you know, you have to deal with your students where they are. And, you know, I can sit there as a biology teacher and talk about evolution, but if I'm ignoring the fact that many of them are having a very hard time absorbing this information because of what they're hearing at home, because of their own beliefs, because it challenges beliefs that they've learned for a long time, then I'm not necessarily being a good teacher. So I may have to kind of acknowledge it.
While we've taken into account the opinions of teachers, experts, and students themselves, the fact remains that each individual has their own opinion about whether the theory of evolution is true and should be taught in public schools. These conflicting opinions aren't going to change. Still, we researchers agree that students can make an informed decision about whether they believe in the theory of evolution or creationism without the opportunity to learn about each. We would therefore encourage public schools to teach a theory of evolution, simply because students deserve to know about this branch of science. Once they understand it, they can decide for themselves. Do I accept the concept of evolution or the story of creation from my own religion? Perhaps they may even reimagine their faith to include evolution in order to affirm both ideas. After all, this decision is a personal one, and it shouldn't be up to anyone but the individual to decide what they believe.
So, we've presented you with all the information we could find. Now it's your turn to decide what the right thing to do is.